The purpose of this PowerPoint is just to summarize some information that was discussed and brought out at the May 2016 GIS Forum that we had in this past year. And we actually had two different sessions at that forum where we discussed topics similar to what we're going to be discussing today. And so I just wanted to share that information, and it'll be posted as a PowerPoint along with the YouTube video so that you can refer back to it if it's of interest. I also have our list of panelists here on this first slide. Johnathan Croft from VTrans, Shawna Smith from Pitney-Bowes, excuse me, Darren Schibler from UVM, and Bill Hegman from Middlebury College. Okay, so as I said, I'm going to do this quick overview, and then each panelist will discuss these topics. We'll take one topic at a time. Each panelist will go through and share their thoughts on it, and then we'll move on to the next topic, and then we'll end with our Q&A. Excuse me. So one of the things that we talked about at that May conference was certifications and certificates, and we just did a quick overview of what's the difference, and also the fact that the GIS Professional Certification, a particular certification, has changed. In the past, it did not involve a test, and starting, I believe, the end of 2016, it does actually involve a test now. So anyone that is going to get a GISP for the first time will have to pass an exam. And also anybody who let their GISP lapse so that they're now having to reapply to get it will have to do the test. If you have a GISP right now and you have not let it lapse, when you go back to renew it, you will not have to do the test. A little bit of information about the GISP. And then some other things that came up were other certifications that can be relevant to GIS practitioners. The ASPRS certifications and the AICP came up in particular. Some other topics that we talked about briefly were, or we didn't talk about them briefly at the time, I'm talking about them briefly now, were about communicating your education and experience to potential employers. One thing that came up was there were some questions about which is more important, education or experience, and I think not too surprisingly, the conclusion was that really both are important. Experience and internships certainly are looked on favorably. Your resume, here's some tips about things to think about in the resume. There were a few different things that got discussed, including the idea of a portfolio, which was kind of a new thing. It can be really helpful. It's a good idea to provide a link to a portfolio as opposed to submitting a portfolio, unless it's requested, of course. And then in your cover letter, make sure to highlight specific skills and experiences that relate to the specific position you're applying for. And in all of these, obviously, when you're turning in documents, make sure to do your spelling and grammar check. And then the only other things I wanted to share were doing research on the employer. So when you're applying for a job, I certainly have noticed when dealing with hiring experiences that the candidates who do research about the employer and show that knowledge in your cover letter and in the interview really tend to rise to the top. And then don't be intimidated by positions that seem to require everything. Sometimes an employer kind of throws everything into the description and what they're looking for, but that doesn't mean that they're excluding candidates who don't have absolutely everything. And then one of the other things that came up in that discussion was a request to employers by applicants, which was to be explicit about how much grunt work was likely to be required in the position. And then that second one actually has to do with a webinar that we recently tried to do that nobody showed up for, unfortunately, but we will try again, which has to do with the State of Vermont GIS Career Ladder that was recently developed. Okay, so I think we are ready to move on to the panel discussion. As I mentioned, I know I went through that quickly. It's not really the point of this webinar, and this this PowerPoint will be posted so that anybody who's interested can have access to this little summary. I believe we are ready to move on to our panel discussion. So I'm going to have Bill Hegman be our first actually, I'm going to unmute all of our panelists, just so you know, you're now all unmuted. And I'm going to start with Bill. And Bill, do you want me to hand you over the presentation right now? Do you want to show some stuff in your answer to this first question?
No, I think, I don't think I need it right yet.
Okay. All right. So I would just assume that I'm good until anybody just asks me if they want the presentation handed over. Okay?
That's good.
Great. Okay. Go for it, Bill.
Okay. Well, thanks. And as Leslie mentioned, my name is Bill Hegman, and I work at Middlebury College. My title there is the GIS specialist, and I also teaching fellow. And I've been there for 17 years now. It's hard to believe. But in that capacity, I provide technical assistance to students throughout their work, throughout their time there, and including when they're working on special independent problems or a thesis or other things. And I also coordinate internships, which I'll come back to. And then I also teach some different courses. And this past year I taught a course on putting GIS on the map, putting business on the map, and GIS, the geospatial industry or whatever. So that was interesting for me to be able to get back up to speed. And I taught it with an alumni, Chelsea Minton, who worked for OmniEarth, a company that's developing a new set of satellites that will be up to have sort of mid-range data that they use. But they also developed a really interesting app that they're marketing in California related to drought and residential water use. So that was great. But I also have been involved with, like I said, internship development. And so in that capacity, I've probably helped develop and coordinate, hundreds of internships over the 17 years. And so that's, and I also get to review resumes and different students that apply. And students also come to me quite a bit for advice on jobs after they leave Middlebury. So I do spend quite a bit of time on that. I've been out of the job market myself for 17 years, so that's a little bit different. But before that, I used to work for a private consulting firm in Burlington. It was all international development work. It was known as ARD. It's now bought by Tetra Tech. And I helped start their GIS system. So that just gives you a little bit of background. My background's also in natural resources planning and management, but I get a wide variety of things at Middlebury. So that's my background, and that's where I'm coming from. So I think just this first question here, and addressing it, the top 3 tips to job applicants to make themselves marketable. Leslie had a few of those things on her slides before, and I may emphasize some of those. But just to, I wrote down a whole bunch here, and I couldn't limit it to 3, but I'm gonna limit it to 3 here, and then we can always come back to more of them. So I think one of them that Leslie mentioned, and I'm just going to start with that, is what can make you more marketable. Of course, if you're younger, internships, and I think that those have been extremely useful for students that I've had. It helps them get their foot in the door. And what I've found, at least at Middlebury, and I know that this is also key and happening at UVM, because we've been working with UVM on this, is that the colleges and universities are getting a tremendous amount of pressure from the students and from alumni, believe it or not, and others to provide internship opportunities. And that means to come up with money that supports internships, and to also create clearinghouses for internships. So at Middlebury we have something called the Center for Careers and Internships, and that's where students can come to. I work really closely with them, and I also have an internship fund that I use in the geography department, and that's where I'm at. I'm in the geography department at Middlebury. So I would say that, don't look at those, because they're really starting to be quite a number of them, and you're going to have to sort of search for those a little bit and ferret them out. But they're out there, and most of them, a lot of them now will give you a stipend. I think a lot of the stipends are between 3,000 and even 4,000, you know, for a 10-week session in the summer. So, you know, I would encourage you to do that. Some of the more popular ones and the ones that we've developed recently are with NOAA, with the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. We are now also, along with UVM, we've been working with UVM. We both have programs with the Agency of Natural Resources in Vermont to sort of have a long-term agreement to develop and share internships. So we co-fund those with the Agency of Natural Resources. So those are really good. And we can come back to that, and I can give you more tips about finding those if you want. But you're going to have to search a little bit to ferret those out. But I would do that. I mentioned Chelsea Minton, who was an alumni who I taught this course with. So I asked Chelsea these 3 questions too, because she's in the thick of this every day, hiring young people coming out of college and others who are in the field. And so she gave me a little bit of feedback too. And one of the other things that I'd like to just mention about the job top tips is, second one is I would emphasize communication skills on your resume. Okay, lots of technical resumes, you know, they lack these communication skills, and they really are going to set you apart from your colleagues. And because organizations, companies are interested in how you can communicate with customers, how you can contribute written work to technical proposals, etc. So I think that that's really important, and I'm going to touch on that again later in some of the areas where the career development areas. So that's a second one that I would emphasize. And let me see about a third one here, because I've got some other ones. But I guess what I'm going to say is, Leslie mentioned the portfolio, and that to me is very important. And I would start that now, and I would put things into your portfolio, and I would make sure that they're available online. And a little bit later, I bookmarked, I think, 2 or 3 portfolios from students that I used to have. And I'll share those with you, remind me, or we can do it afterwards. But I think those are extremely useful. And related to the portfolio, I guess, this one last thing, and that is that I think that having a variety in the portfolio could be really useful. And the portfolio can be a GitHub variety as well, GitHub portfolio too. You know, so it can take many different forms. It doesn't have to be you know, a web one. It can be GitHub, it could be your own website, it could be several others. It could even be maybe something through LinkedIn. But I would say, you know, pick one or maybe 2 and start populating those a little bit and spend a little bit of time on them. And the variety, and that variety comes from trying a few different things. So I think that they like to see that. I'll leave it there.
Great. Thank you, Bill. Darren, would you like to share your tips?
Yes, I would. Hi, my name is Darren Schibler. I am employed at UVM at the Bailey Howe Library, but I have a background in natural resources. I graduated in 2014 from the Rootstein School, and I've had a few experiences since then. The more relevant position I hold right now is the GIS intern at the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission, and that, you know, has shown me a couple of ideas of how to make your, you know, how to build your GIS career, because that's really my first experience in a GIS related job. But I also am on the Essex Conservation Committee, and I've used my GIS skills there, and that's also helped sort of build a portfolio. So I guess you could say I am a new GIS professional looking for careers in GIS and also urban planning and municipal planning. So, you know, sort of looking at this from the other side of things, from Bill and maybe Johnathan and Shawna, who are more employers. So Bill kind of took a lot of the suggestions that I had right out of my mouth in terms of these tips to job applicants to make yourself marketable. Internships absolutely are a good thing to have, and I guess since Bill covered, what, how internships look from an employer side, I'll say, from a, employee's side or a, new GIS professional, it helps you build your portfolio and you can be working on projects and, keeping track of the projects that you're working on while you're at these internships and, recognize that they're, for your property of or projects for the organization you're working for, but there's still things that you can put in your portfolio. And another aspect of that is in terms of getting those internships, while you're still in college or wherever you are, trying to get some experiential learning and some service learning classes under your belt, because those are essentially internships in and of themselves. UVM has a really good service learning program, both in the Rubenstein School and school-wide, university-wide. So really try and take those classes and really make an effort to do very well in those classes and to make those projects worthwhile, because they'll really help showcase your abilities as a freshly minted college grad. There's many, many more who have the same credential of, graduated from X university with this degree, but the service learning really makes you stand out. And Bill also mentioned, making sure those soft skills show up on your resume, and that's absolutely something that I think has helped me both in GIS and non-GIS related jobs, but just showing that, you're a nice person, you can communicate well verbally and in written form, and absolutely the customer service side of things. I was at the UVM library as a student worker in the front desk, and I think that helped show that, I can talk to people who walk in the door and people who don't necessarily have experience in whatever subject or, expertise that I have, and I can sort of go between and, translate in a way. And I think that's important for a GIS professional because, you might be aware of the, intricacies and ins and outs of using ArcGIS and the programming side of things or whatever your expertise is, but the people you're presenting to are often, by definition, not GIS people if you're part of a larger organization. So making sure that you can use those communication skills in a way that, is effective and not patronizing or, shows that you have the ability to translate what you know into words that other people can understand. And the last thing that I'll say about tips to make yourself marketable are focusing as much as possible on making your experiences multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary, making sure that you're pursuing opportunities that sort of push your boundaries and not just, doubling down on ArcGIS, but trying Q or learning some Python skills or, getting experience in planning if you're a natural resources person or, engineering if you don't necessarily have that background, because being able to show that you've got flexibility is good. Knowing different aspects of GIS related work is good because it can apply to everything and, is usable in so many different contexts. It's nice to show that you can plug yourself into wherever your employer wants you to work. So those are the things that I would recommend in this category, and we'll come back to a few more examples and other areas of career development later. But
Great. Thank you, Darren.
Hand it back to you. Yeah, thanks, Leslie.
All right. Johnathan, you're up.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Johnathan Croft, and I'm the Chief of Mapping at the Agency of Transportation. And I've been working in GIS for quite a while and had an opportunity to hire the team that I work with now. And then also I sit on panels with other hiring managers for other positions that have GIS as one of their components. And I'm going to look at this a little bit different way, that making someone marketable, you may have an incredible series of skills, but you need to make sure that that's presented to your employer through your resume and also your job application to ensure that that information is being conveyed in the right way. So what I would sort of throw out there is make sure you're reading a job listing and then tailor your resume to what that job is requesting. Ensure that you cover all those skills that you do have and to make sure that that's sort of highlighted as opposed to having a little standard resume to submit for every single job. you want to look at it and tailor it specific to the position that you're seeking. There's also another sort of item of making yourself marketable is learning about the organization where the position that you're seeking is at, getting an idea of what they do and what the various skills that you may need for that position, and maybe go out and try to seek that, do some independent learning to try to fill in any gaps that may exist. And positions are posted and they're out and posted for quite a while, so you may have some lead time to actually do a little bit of self-teaching to fill in those gaps. And then I'm going to echo what Bill and Darren talked about with the internship. Definitely rolling up your sleeves and taking an internship, or even taking a temporary position that's going to expose you to something new. You may have skills that will help you to get that position, but it may expose you to a very specific business to learn a lot more from actually getting in there with your sleeves rolled up and doing it. So those are the items I think I would add to them.
Great, thank you, Jonathan. Shawna, you are up on deck, or no, you're not on deck. You're up next. Oh, do we still have Shawna?
Oh, sorry, I was still muted there. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Thanks.
Okay, great. So I'm Shawna Smith. I'm the Human Resources Manager at Pitney-Bowes, which was formerly Maponics. We were acquired by Pitney-Bowes in July of last year. So I have an interesting take because obviously I'm coming from the hiring manager perspective, and just a little bit of a backdrop on Maponics involvement in GIS. So we piloted in the fall of 2015 what we call a mapping technician program. So it's literally accepting folks who are brand new graduates from whether it be geography or GIS specific tracks. So we launched a program where we're specifically targeting folks who were recent graduates from those disciplines. And what that allowed us to do was really be one of the only employers in the country who will truly take someone who is 100% entry level. They've never had an internship. They've never, in most cases, they're literally just graduated. So it's a little bit of a unique situation in that we are really targeting the very entry level folks. So a couple of tips that I have, I agree with a lot of what the other panelists have mentioned about the tailoring the resume. It's super important to make sure that you don't have a cookie cutter resume and cover letter and that you're sending the same thing to every position, because the hiring managers can tell when something's very generic, and it feels to the hiring manager as if the sincerity and the importance is not there. So make sure that you tailor that resume and cover letter. I've even gotten cover letters with the wrong company name on it. So just be super mindful of that. Always make sure you're checking grammar and all of the things that you learn in resume 101, right? But those are super important as you're looking for positions. One of the other things I can say is, there's a part of this that's an expectation setting, right? So accept that you're probably going to be doing grunt work at first. If you're truly entry level, you've got to work your way up and prove yourself at any company that you're going to be employed at. So understanding that, coming in and having an expectation of making $20 an hour, depending on the geography of where you're going, certainly I can say in Vermont, that's an unrealistic expectation to have as an entry-level GISer, right? So just make sure that you're setting your expectations realistically for the role that you are applying for. And make sure, it doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense to apply for managerial positions. It's highly unlikely that you would get that, right, unless you have specific experience in that arena. So just make sure that you're setting your expectations realistically. The other tip I would say during the application process is be mindful of social media. Every hiring manager looks at social media specifically. And so I really can't stress enough, be mindful of your social media and make sure that that's presenting yourself the way that you want to be presented as a professional. If you don't have a LinkedIn, I would highly recommend start a LinkedIn page. That is the first impression that the hiring manager of you, right? So they're going to see what you look like. They're going to match your resume up with your LinkedIn profile and see if there's anything maybe they can learn about you from LinkedIn that they couldn't necessarily see on your resume. So LinkedIn is always a good idea. Hiring managers always look for that, and it speaks to professionalism if you've got one in place already. Okay, let me think. So mistakes. I mentioned one already about the cover letter, not indicating the correct company name. To the best of your ability, and I agree with Johnathan, make sure that you research the company and you understand what it is that they do or build so that you can explain how you can add value, right? Because the employer always wants to know what value is this person going to add to our company or our organization. I see it so often now with folks who are, for some reason, entitled. Don't be entitled, right? We understand you've got a great education behind you, but you are just starting out. So be a bit humble and, absolutely be willing to learn. That's the biggest thing. If you're in an interview and someone asks you a question you don't know, just be honest and say, I don't know that, but I'm really looking forward to learning it, right? So the biggest thing that you can do is voice that you're committed to your professional development. So speaking to that effect, with regard to professional development and career advancement, I would have to second what Johnathan said about the soft skills. So a lot of what I end up coaching young professionals through is, quite honestly, maturing as a professional. So things like having a difficult conversation with a staff member or a manager even, right? There will be managers in your life that you will not mesh well with. It's going to happen. If it never happens to you, oh my goodness, congratulations. But I've never talked to anyone that has never had a difficult situation at least at one point in their lives. So do some work ahead of time and try to put yourself in that situation and say, how would I handle this, right? There's tons of resources, even online, that are for free. Think about those kinds of things because that's what will set you apart as a young professional is how can you control your emotion, right? So if you're upset about something, how are you going to respond to that in a professional, structured manner so that you resolve the issue and you're able to move forward positively with whatever the person or the situation is. And then lastly, I think in terms of career development, one that's super important in growing as a professional is presentation skills. So practice speaking, even if it's in the mirror, right? So write a speech, even if it's just something that you made up, and practice speaking that. Practice presentation skills. Make sure that you're fluent with PowerPoint, because most employers, if they're going to move you forward with maybe managing projects or things of that nature, there's going to be an expectation of presentation. And again, I'll second what someone else said about communication. Make sure that you are a good communicator, not only verbally but in writing. Don't use internet slang ever in an email. It's very unprofessional, and always bullet out your points, right? So when someone's reading your email, they want to have a good flow of what is the point? What is this person getting at, right? There's too many emails in this world as it is. So get to the point, bullet your points out, and I would say I like the resumes that are like that, right? So resumes that say, here's what I did in my internship, and then bullets of what you accomplished during that. So I created a map of X, Y, Z. Oh, and by the way, here's an attachment of that. If possible, as someone else mentioned, attach your work, attach examples of your work if you can, if you're able to. I think that's all that I can think of, unless there are any specific questions.
Sorry for the pause there. I had to catch up. My apologies, by the way, before I forgot to mute myself at some point and was typing away. I apologize I think I blocked out Johnathan a bit. So you jumped ahead a little bit, Shawna, but I didn't want to stop you because you were on a roll. So I think we're going to circle back around to Bill and talk about that second bullet, the examples of mistakes that...
oh, you're right. I did all my bullets in one, didn't
That's
I?
okay. That's okay. You're on a roll. So Bill, if you could unmute yourself and share with us any examples of mistakes that applicants have made that took them out of running for a position.
Okay, yeah, I can try. So a couple thoughts on that. You know, some of these are interesting because some of the things we're all talking about are things that you would affect you in any position, whatever field you're in. But so you know, they're applicable across the realm. But I'll try to be as specific as I can here. But examples of mistakes applicants make that take them out of the running. I think Shawna mentioned one, and I'm going to sort of elaborate on it. But I have this down as sort of bad-mouthing a previous employer or bad-mouthing software. I think when I'm assuming you're getting to a point where you're either in a cover letter or a phone interview. I would stay positive. And for instance, rather than saying, oh, this software just doesn't do this, it's terrible with that, I would try to talk about the strengths and different strengths of different software, and as well as the strengths of different approaches that you might take to solving a problem. You know, you may have seen this problem before and it didn't work, or you worked in a company where it didn't work, or an internship. I would and talking about the strengths of something and from a positive standpoint, that's a little bit harder to do, and that comes back to the point that I think all of us made, is that you have to be prepared. You have to research your employer, and I think that's where I'm going next with this next point, which kind of rolls into it, is that you have to know, you have to go into your interview rested and prepared, and know the company that you're interviewing with, and more as importantly, know where you're fitting into this interview. And if I could just share one example here to give you a sense of the level of depth that I'm talking about. Leslie, I think I need to share my screen for a moment. Can I do that?
Yes, you can. Hold on just a second. Go.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. Thanks. There was a student recently that had an interview with ESRI for a solutions engineer. It was a fascinating job. Actually, I wanted the job because it was so fascinating. But and the solutions engineer was in the business realm. And what you do is you're part of a team. And this team would work together, and they would with the client, and they would identify the areas where the client might use geospatial technologies, and then help to develop those different applications. And this video right here is something that Esri put up about Walgreens and how Esri is working with Walgreens. Now, I just wanted to show you, I'm not going to run the video right now, but there's lots of parts of this video, and it describes, it talks, there's one part where the solutions department within Walgreens, or the IT department within Walgreens, their job in relationship to all the other departments in Walgreens. So in the video, Walgreens staff describe what their position is. And then they describe some of the applications that they came up with, that Esri described some of the applications that they came up with to help Walgreens. One of the applications happened to be with a flu index. And the way that they did it, which was really interesting, is that they just took all of their sales data for flu, for the flu medicines that they sell, and they just popped it into GIS and look and see where they're selling flu medications, so they could do it real time almost. Now, it's not a complete, picture like CDC puts out, but CDC only puts it out every 2 weeks. So they had this flu index, and it was helping them sell more products, and they thought maybe it could be something that could help with CDC and others, as crowdsourcing type thing. So I thought it was interesting, but there was also, my point is, there was a number of other applications that they described. So they asked the applicant for this job, one of my students, to watch this video before they had a phone interview with her. And so she watched it, and I watched it, and we all looked at it. We talked about it, and they asked her several questions. One is, but one of the most interesting questions I thought they asked that she was prepared for, but probably could have been prepared a little bit better, was they asked her, what of what you saw in the video, which ones of those applications are going to give Walgreens the most cost savings, and why? So that's a good example of not only do you need to know software and stuff, but you need to understand sort of the organizational structure of Walgreens and where you would fit in with the team and what your skills could be. But you need to understand the bigger picture of sort of where do you think that the savings might be in that particular application. So doing some homework beforehand would be a good thing. So that's all I wanted to show with that one. But you can take a look and find this video and watch it. It says Walgreens, learn how Walgreens uses strategic geocentric approaches. Okay, so write that down and take a look at that. So that's all I wanted to show on that. Should I turn this back over to you?
Sure. Are you? Should I hand things over to Darren next, or do you have any more points to make?
Hold on. Let me see if I have one other thing. Well, yeah, just one other quick thing, and that is that on your resume and cover letter, there's times when people don't elaborate enough on their GIS skills that they have. Simply taking a class and having a degree, doesn't really tell you what you truly, you can truly do. So, when you can, make sure you give some detail there. I think that can help. Otherwise, you're lost in a pile. That's all I got.
Great, thank you. Okay, Darren, you are next, and I'm going to take back the screen.
Hey, thanks, Leslie. I'll echo a few things that Bill and Shawna said. So Bill talked about talking positively about previous job experiences, and the one thing I'll add to that is you'll always have a problem with XYZ software or this person or that situation, but I think what's important to an employer and important to think about from your career development and how you market yourself is how do you respond to that situation. That's what they're interested in. Everybody has an issue at work, and how you respond to problems and what are your problem-solving skills. And sort of in line with that, when you're putting together your resume and talking, putting in your job descriptions, you don't want to just put things that, this is what I did or this is what my, position description was. Add some value to, describing that and just talking about your accomplishments and what did you bring to your position that, made you stand out from anybody else who's applying for the job that you're applying for, and just show, the type of person you are and the type of work that you can bring to the company that you're applying to. And then Shawna said something about exaggerating your skills or, being a little overconfident, and I'd say, that's really important, not to show that you're not entitled or to show that you're humble, and also, you don't want to exaggerate your skills beyond what you think you're actually capable of, because if you end up getting the job based on what the employer thinks you're capable of and then realize you're in over your head, that's going to leave a bad taste in everybody's mouth, and then you'll be looking for another job fairly quickly after that. So make sure that you're realistic about what you can do and what you know and what you don't know, and be willing to say, like, I don't know this, but I really do want to learn it, especially when it comes to I want to develop my career, I want to pursue a certification, I want to work on this specific subfield, and show that you're excited about it. And one thing that I'll add is true for many jobs, but apply early and don't wait till the last minute to put your application together. You know, if you think you've got time, it's better to get it in early because I've never been on the receiving end of job applications, but I know from applying to them that the sooner you get in, the more likely they are to see it. And one job that I applied to recently, I didn't actually hear about it until later, and I took a lot of time making sure my application was perfect, and then never heard back. And once I followed up with them, they said, oh, well, we had already selected our candidates by the time, you know, your application came in, so sorry about that. And, you know, make sure that you're not taking yourself out of the running for something as simple as that. And at the same time, make sure that you're submitting an application that's been thoroughly vetted, and, you know, someone's taking a look at your resume and cover letter to catch those, you know, mistakes that you might not see yourself, or just to see, like, hey, does this make sense? Does this look good? But it's always a balance. That's all I have to say about these sorts of mistakes. Leslie, I'll pass it back to you and Johnathan.
Great. Thank you, Darren. You're up, Johnathan.
So I really want to echo Darren's point about being timely and prompt, and that's both for application deadlines as well as interviews. Within state government, we have the Department of Human Resources and an online application system, and it's not flexible. That there is a deadline that applications have to be received, and if they're not received by that point, they don't get considered at all. So that's a case where being timely is really essential. So that's one critical piece. The other situation with the online application system with state government, and I know I'm talking very specific to the state, but this may apply to some other systems. When applying, there may be some very specific questions that are posed to the applicant, and in the case of the state, some of those questions may be flexible, or they may be absolute. If you're required to have 2 years of experience in a specific task, and you check yes, that application goes forward. If you check no, you're not considered for the position at all. So there are cases where there are these questions that do get posed, and you need to make sure that your skill set matches those questions that are being posed, or your application may not even go to the hiring manager, that it may just get excluded right off the bat based on how those prerequisites and requirements are within the application process. So this may go back to what Shawna was saying, that you want to be sort of tailored to the position and have the skill set necessary, and not try to sort of inflate what you've got, because there may be a go or no-go question that comes up in the application process. And I am talking specifics about the state system, that there are several different components of the application, and when there's a section on job experience where you need to put down what jobs you've had in the past and a description of the jobs, some applicants have gone through the process and just assumed that it's on the resume. They don't have to fill out that section. So hiring managers receive an application that the resume is separate, but the application shows a lot of gaps and no job positions or any experience shown. So that can be a case where it's a little off-putting to the hiring manager as they're reviewing a stack of applications. All are in the same format, and then one application comes through and the whole job history is missing because there's an assumption that they should be looking at the resume as well. So that's kind of a challenge. So following the process that's presented to you through an application process, I think is really important. Taking the time to make sure that everything is filled out as accurately and correctly and complete as possible, so the hiring manager has all the information when they're making the ultimate selection of the candidate, and then how you compare against the other candidates and how well they filled out their applications as well. So I think that those would be the pieces that I would put forward.
Great. Thank you, Johnathan. I'll just throw in my 2 cents here that I agree with all of these. We've dealt with a few different hiring situations at VCGI in the last couple of years, and it really is true that although it seems trivial that following directions is one of the most challenging things for applicants, as far as I can tell, because there are a lot of applications that are not properly filled out, don't include everything that was requested, or where people didn't do spell check, grammar check. Make sure you actually have attached all of the documents you think you have when you submit. We've actually gotten applications where somebody forgot their resume, and unfortunately I couldn't make a special case for them and contact them and tell them that they forgot it. I needed to treat everyone the same. So anyway, just emphasize that making simple mistakes is going to make you sad if that's the thing that causes you not to get a job. So Shawna, yeah, go ahead.
Leslie, I'm going to throw in another mistake.
Yep.
And this goes back to what Bill was talking about and being prepared. I once went to a job interview, and I haven't interviewed for many in my career, but I went to one job interview, and when I arrived, I mispronounced one of the hiring manager's names wrong.
Oh.
and essentially my job opportunity was dead on arrival.
Wow.
So that's doing your homework in advance and being prepared makes a big difference.
So Shawna, I know you already gave us some of these. Have any others come to mind as we've all been talking about this?
Yeah, I think one thing that's not necessarily a mistake, but it certainly will help you stand out, is to make sure you send a thank you note. And not a week later, a timely thank you note. And the best thank you notes I've gotten are ones that mention details of our conversation. If you have a phone interview with someone, you follow up with a thank you note. Maybe you emphasize a particular part of the conversation that you had that was important to you, or an important takeaway that you got from the conversation. Anytime you can send a thank you note with any detail, I think that goes a long way.
Great. Great suggestion. Okay, I think we're going to go on to the third question, and I'm going to ask Bill again to step in and share his thoughts about top 3 neglected areas of career development for people in or wanting to start GIS-related careers. So, Bill, do you have anything additional that you haven't shared yet?
Yes.
Great. I knew you would.
Okay, let's see. Well, I think this one was, I started thinking about career development when I first looked at the question. I jot down all these things that were fairly concrete, and then I started thinking, well, wait a minute, career development, not just skills, but career development. So I guess my things might be a little bit mixed. I might have some hard sort of skill things that I'm going to talk about, and some other things that are more a little bit broader. But anyway, I'll just start into it. I picked 3, and then other people seem to be picking up on other ones. We've had a lot of overlap here, and I think that's really good that we've had that. Top 3 neglected areas of career development. Okay, one is this is a bias of mine, but I see this in Middlebury because we have a strong cartography program. Cartographic design skills, I think, are something that are sort of neglected or underdeveloped a little bit. And I can't emphasize enough how important those skills are. If you could and it's very difficult, doing good cartography is, as all of us here can attest, it's really time consuming, and it's difficult sometimes. I'm not very good at it, actually. I try, but you have to put it out there and do it, and it could be part of your portfolio. But there are many resources out there to try to work on cartographic sort of design skills. So, for instance, NACIS, which is the North American Cartographic Information Society. That's just an example of something that I love. NACIS. They have a conference every year. This year in the fall in October, it's going to be in Montreal, It's a 2 or 3 day conference. It's by far the best, most worthy conference I've ever been to. The people that are there are more than willing to share their experience about cartographic design. They have great workshops, and it's just a wonderful resource. You know, within NACIS you can find other things. There's a magazine they put out that's free called Cartographic Perspectives. So I would look around and see what kinds of resources you can find and try to develop some of those cartography skills a little bit, even if you have to do it on your own. Take a look at National Geographic maps and other resources, and try to pick out some things. Maybe you know, improve on a map you've already made. But I think those are really good skills that are being that will make you stand separate, be apart from others. All right. Let me just come back to this. Oh, before I do that, I would say try not to get tied down with one geospatial technology. I would say, you know, learn as much as you can about what's going on in your field and the solutions that are out there, software solutions especially, because you know, that will set you apart a little bit. And it's difficult because things are moving so fast. But just go out there and look around and see what's going on. There's so many tools out there. You know, should you be going to the U.S. Census site when you really can get data so much faster and visualize it better, and it could serve your client by going to the National Historic GIS site instead? You know, so there's so many things. Should you look at ArcGIS Online versus Carto versus Mapbox. I mean, you don't have to be an expert at them, but I think if you research them a little bit, I think that can be useful, because there are so many solutions out there, and they're looking. You know, employers are looking, I think, to see how much you know, and how much you can sort of give them a sense of variety. Last thing I want to say on this in career development is, and we've already mentioned this, and I'm going to cover it again here, is, you know, technical GIS, however much you love it, you know, careers can't advance very far without additional skills. You know, there's only so many maps you can make. If you want, you know, you really need to develop your soft skills and to step into the kind of that role. And this could mean, you know, having skills in program management, managing GIS teams, teaching a little bit of GIS. Coding is good too, but so I think that in communication, and we mentioned those, so don't overlook those because they really help you round you out, because, you know, organizations want to hire somebody that has a good variety of skills there, so that they can, you know, fit them in, and you can become a little bit of a GIS manager if they want you to. You can move into different roles. You can work with clients. So, you know, I say those soft skills are really important, and maybe some other people like Shawna and others can speak to that a little bit and how to develop those. But I'll leave that there for now.
Okay, great. Thank you, Bill. Darren?
Yes, Bill, as usual, has covered a lot of what I had to say, but I'll echo some things he said. And I also wanted to ask you, Bill, if you had any suggestions for GIS professionals as far as building an online portfolio and how to do that. I don't know if there's a certain website that you'd recommend, or a format that you'd recommend, or if you can even do it on LinkedIn and how that looks to a job hiring manager. But if you could put out some suggestions, I think that a lot of us would appreciate that. And, you know, another aspect of that is that it is hard to find entry-level positions in GIS that allow you to build that portfolio. I mean, there's entry-level positions in, you know, planning and zoning departments, and, you know, technicians, and, you know, field techs for regional planning commissions, and, you know, maybe I'm not looking in the right places, but I'm not seeing a lot of positions where you could start building a portfolio to get your GISP unless you've already been at said company and you have moved up. So I don't know if, you know, anybody else has some input on that, and if, like I said, I'm just not seeing those positions and not knowing what they entail, but as someone who's coming at it from the applicant side of things, it seems pretty sparse. And I also want to echo what Bill said about, you know, specializing and, you know, diversifying your GIS experience and your abilities. You know, working at CCRPC, they were really excited about the fact that I could do some Python coding, and had me working on a project that used those skills extensively. And so having even this, you know, one semester of taking Python really helped me stand out as once I was already there, and even when I was applying. So that really does make a difference. It doesn't have to be coding. It can be, you know, like Bill said, ArcGIS Online, or, you know, doing imagery and remote sensing. But having something else to say, I have ArcGIS and this other skill. And another thing I wanted to mention in the marketable category, but this sort of falls in here too, is getting on listservs for the careers you're interested in, especially GIS. Vermont has a great GIS listserv that Leslie does a great job of posting to, whether it's, you know, discussions or, you know, resources or job postings. You know, that's actually how I found out about this webinar, or, you know, suggested to Leslie that, hey, we could have a webinar on this. And it was, you know, it's good to keep up with your field and see, you know, what discussions are happening and what's new in the field. And last thing I'll add, since Bill mentioned cartography and cartography skills, there's a great blog called cartonerd.blogspot.com. If you're interested in cartography, it has some, you know, a new thing every couple days, I think, about, you know, this new map and, you know, how it showcases an element of cartography that, you know, you don't always think about.
Hi, Darren.
That's all I got.
I'm sorry, could you repeat one more time that thing you just said? I got distracted right as you said. Cartoon.
Yeah, I can send you a link if you want to do it in the chat.
I'm just going to make sure to record it here in this.
And it's just cartonerd.blogspot.com.
Great.
That's something that when I took GIS at UVM with Pete Young, he showed us and was like, this is a great way to sort of look at cartography in a different way and keep up with, you know, how are you making your maps.
Great, thank you. Okay, Jonathan, you're up.
I think the only thing that I can add is just echoing the communication and interpersonal skills. They are really critical for positions both in networking, to be able to find jobs that are out there, that knowing someone who can key you in on a position that might be coming available, I think is really important. The relationships and networking that you build are really important, and being able to have that communication and interpersonal skills is really, really somewhat of a key to success. That the adage of it's not what you know, it's who you know, that does play into it a bit. Making sure that you have the skills to be able to communicate well, build your relationships, and having a good, robust network can be very, very helpful as your career search goes forward. So that's just the item that I would reiterate.
Great, thank you. I'll just throw in, I appreciate Darren mentioning the listserv, the Vermont GIS listserv. Some of you may have heard about this webinar also through the NEARC listserv or through the New England URISA email list that they sent out announcements about this. And I also just wanted to say there's, generally speaking, wherever you live, there are other things going on that you can participate in. There are professional development events that happen in all of the states, whether it's a training or just a conference. And even if you feel like you're just getting started and maybe you don't really have a professional job yet in GIS, that doesn't mean you can't participate in these events. And actually, you tend to be a very welcome addition to those events. And it is an opportunity to meet who the people are that are doing the jobs that you might want to do or that you might who you might want to work with. So it's a good idea to participate in those if you can. And Shawna, did you want to add anything else to this final topic?
Okay, I think one thing that I didn't mention before that I think is important is, you know, it seems to be there are a lot of technical people who are introverts. So I found a good book one time that's called Being an Introvert in an Extroverted World that I think comes in really handy for anyone who is an introvert and wants to really step outside of that box and really stretch themselves. And I think that most professionals, as they work their way up the career ladder, you kind of end up forcing yourself outside of your comfort zone, and that's a good thing. But it can be daunting and it can be scary. So don't be afraid to step outside of your box and push yourself to do something that you maybe wouldn't think you would be able to do otherwise, maybe volunteering to lead a project, for example. But those are all, it's very critical to have in the workplace, especially as you advance further up in your career. As I mentioned presentation skills before, but that's really hard for someone who's an introvert, right? So being in tune with who you are and what your personality style is so that you can effectively manage how you present yourself or how you communicate. It's super important to really understand yourself and be able to play on your positives and your negatives, right? So turn your negatives into positives if you can. Find ways to proactively manage your personality and style in a way that's going to be most valuable to the employer and to yourself as you advance in your career. The other thing I'll say, just from a personal standpoint at our company, one of the skills that we find extremely valuable is database management, right? So a lot of our products, we deal with a lot of big data, right? Pitney-Bowes is a huge company. So any extra experience you can gain or extra learnings you can gain in terms of managing databases, that's a critical skill, and especially with larger employers. So that would be a good one to advance if possible. Can't think of any others that I haven't mentioned.
Okay, great. Well, I think we've got a wonderful list of ideas and tips for each of these 3 topics, and I've been noting them down here in our PowerPoint just to kind of add them, and I'll figure out how to make that look a little better before I finalize that. But I think at this point we do have a bunch of questions, so I'm going to unmute everybody. And if you have muted yourself and need to unmute yourself, go ahead and do that. But just so that you can respond to the questions as I read through them, and I'll try not to type while I'm doing this. All right, going back to the beginning. Let's see. There we go. And I should have put my glasses on before I started this, sorry. Are there any scholarships to receive GISP or other certificates? Because not all jobs obviously pay for the fees associated with certifications. I don't know of anything like that. I don't know whether URISA or New England URISA or anybody offers scholarships for the GISP. Do any of you, have you heard of anything like that?
No, I don't know of any either.
Okay.
So.
That might be something to look at the URISA or New England URISA websites, but I have not heard of anything like that. Okay, and here Joshua's got a bunch of questions. Is it better to list specific GIS software, i.e. ArcGIS, or specific GIS processing? I guess that he's talking specifically about maybe on a resume in terms of identifying your skills, I guess, or experience. Anybody have a thought about that?
I list ArcGIS on my resume as a software skill, along with Excel and Python and other things. But I feel like there's a certain level of aptitude to have in a certain program, and if you have a very specialized process that you would want to highlight, I might put that in, you know, you could make that stand out either in your software, you know, your skills section, or maybe in a job description saying this is what I did for this specific job. But I mean, I can't think of anything that I do on a regular basis that's not sort of generally expected maybe of a person who knows ArcGIS. And you could argue that knowing it in ArcGIS is knowing it in Q or another program, but what do you guys think?
I have when I asked, I talked with my friend Chelsea, and one of her comments was, since she does a lot of hiring for her company OmniEarth, which is very technical, but she was saying, she suggested adding specific GIS programs and even individual tool sets you're comfortable with. In other words, network analyst, raster analyst, geocoding in there. So a little more specifics that show the employer that you have done some of that. I suppose that could go along with maybe my resume is probably a little long, but I have a little bit of narrative in there about what I did as far as individual projects and so on. So
this also might be a good example of where tailoring your resume to the specific job applies, where it might not make sense to list every GIS processing thing that you've learned or you've done if the job is not really focused on that side of things.
Right.
You could also show a lot of these processing skills in your in your portfolio. Showing this project, here's what I did for it, and say in your resume, reference the portfolio item that you want to highlight.
Right. That's what I was actually, as you were saying that, I was thinking the only problem with that is you don't want to rely on your portfolio to say something that isn't said in your resume. So it's important to highlight and point towards your portfolio if you want to let your portfolio get across that particular very specific skill.
Yeah. And I have one thing, this is Bill. That's a good point, and I didn't mention it. I mentioned a little bit, but I think you need to be careful about your audience, know who they are, that you don't lose them with technical jargon and terminology too much. So maybe putting it in a portfolio might be a better way to highlight some of that, but you have to be a little bit careful with that.
Yep. Okay, next question is how, actually these two questions are kind of related, how to market GIS skills in a non-GIS position, and then his other question is how to introduce GIS to a company that would benefit from it but is not currently using it.
Well, this is Bill again. I'll start because I have a bias here, but and that's because I'm in the geography department. So I try to frame things sort of like that Esri video there in a geospatial terms. So sometimes I may even shy away from the word GIS for quite a while and try to explain something a little bit more in geospatial terms. So for instance, routing and routing analysis is maybe an example. If you were interviewing with a company and they had to do deliveries like Walgreens, you might try to describe why they might think about looking at routing and how they might save money from. Then you might bring GIS in there, but you might try to describe it a little bit more in terms of geographic processes as opposed to, well, GIS can do this. Yes, well, GIS is the tool we would use to sort of look at this to be able to help us in optimizing routing, to minimize the time that it takes us to deliver all these materials, and also be able to look at how we could minimize our stops, that type of thing. So I tend to try to look at it a little more geographically, and sometimes I even try to shy away from the word GIS a little bit, but that's just my way of doing it, because I think then people can understand it a little bit more. Maybe it becomes a little bit more more accessible to them, familiar, I should say, because most people know geographic processes, but sometimes they don't recognize it. But when you start to describe it in lay terms, or try to describe it in lay terms, I think that that helps them understand, you know, and then you say, oh, GIS is something that we can use to help us there.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question. This gentleman
said, Leslie, I have,
oh, go ahead. Yep, Shawna.
I have just one comment on that. So someone asked, how do we introduce GIS to a company that's not currently using it? I think one of the biggest things, one of the easiest ways is to solve a business problem, right? So if the company has a particular project that they're trying to do that you think could, you know, the problem could be solved in a GIS software, go ahead and do it. Solve the problem and show the company the value in using that as a tool. I think that's the best way.
Can I add to that too, Shawna? That's a good idea. And the one that the Walgreens example with Esri, find the low-hanging fruit. So, for instance, that flu, you know, they had all that data on the you know, flu medicine sales. That's an area where you could very quickly, if they would allow you, or if you at least give them this idea, you could quickly, you know, solve that problem. So find something that's low-hanging, quick to do, but shows that it can be done. You know, it doesn't have to be. You don't want to spend a lot of time and a lot of, you know, trying to get data and do something. Just find the low-hanging fruit and do it and show that it can be done. And that's, you know, that's a place to start oftentimes.
And this is Darren. The one thing I'll add to that is this is where networking and informational interviewing and researching your company really comes into play, because you want to know what their problems are and have some, you know, credentials, some, you know, some way to say, hey, I'd like to solve your problem, instead of just coming into an interview cold and them knowing nothing about you. It's almost like you're working for them before they've even hired you.
Okay, great. The next couple of questions are both from two different people who are making a career change. So they're new GIS professionals or potential GIS professionals, but not necessarily young GIS professionals. I don't mean to imply anything about your ages. You both ask questions saying that you're kind of doing mid-career change. The first question is specifically about salary and salary history, where this person knows that as he applies to GIS jobs, his previous salary history is high in a different field, and he's worried that that's going to work against him if they ask for a salary history. And then the second question has to do with making a lateral transfer going from more sysadmin skills into more GIS stuff. And I'm trying to think what exactly this question. Oh, he'd like to find something. Oh, and basically I think his question is it possible to go into something that's not just entry level? So kind of two slightly different takes on the mid-career lateral change. So any comments on either of those? The salary one, I would just say make it really clear that you know you're making a career change, and that although your salary is what it is in the salary history, that doesn't necessarily match your expectation for your jobs that you're applying for. But
yeah, I guess I would comment, going back to my comment from before, just be realistic, right? So you're deciding to make a career change, and that with that comes the inevitable decision that you'll likely take a pay cut as you're sort of starting out entry level in a new role, as you would, you know, any career change. You almost always will start back over, and it'll feel like a step back. But if it's something that you're passionate about and it's a career move that gets you ultimately where you want to go, then you know it'll ultimately be worth it. But yeah, I mean, being realistic about the expectation that, you know, if you've been doing I don't know, we'll say accounting for 15 years, and then you transition to an entry-level GIS role, that is going to be significantly lower than what you're used to. So just going into that with realistic expectations is important.
I think this is Darren, to answer the question about going from a sysadmin role to a GIS specific role, I mean, I would imagine that database managers and system administrators and people who have a lot of technical and computer expertise are probably in high demand in GIS-related jobs. Depending on where you're looking, I know that there are several GIS positions that are also, data and IT manager, because you're sort of the technical person for a small working group or company. So I guess find a way to market your technical administration skills as much as your GIS skills, and show how that brings a value. And I'm not really in a position to say how that would work, but or how I would view that as a hiring manager. But GIS or technical skills and computer know-how really is important in this world.
I would sort of echo what Darren said, and also Shawna. First, if you had those skills in system administration and other things in database, big data, as Shawna mentioned, I mean, that is really sort of the buzzword of the years or whatever. I mean, these data sets are getting so large, and to have data management skills to be able to deal with those is a really critical role within organizations. So let me give you an example. Faraday, F-A-R-A-D-A-Y, Faraday, it's faraday.io, that's their website. They do customized marketing for, they started off with finding solar installers, and they do customized marketing to help solar installers identify markets. But they're branching out of there. But what they do is they have a GIS, a person in behind who does a lot of the GIS stuff. They have somebody who deals with big data. He lives in Burlington, and they customize. They have a customized interface, and they allow customers who pay for the service to come in and target geographic areas. But they pull in big data sets. They're pulling in data sets from 2 or 3 or 4 different companies, and then they're reusing them and putting them up there. But they need people behind the scenes who can work as part of that team to really make this happen. And you don't realize it from the front end, but the back end there, and they are pulling a ton of data. And there's companies out there doing that all the time. So I think, it's geographic. It's got a really strong geographic component. Geography is really important because you're trying to identify the market or the areas, but you've got to have those people in behind there as part of that team.
Okay, I'm going to move through some of these other questions. We have a lot of great questions and comments, and I think we're going to have to end at 2:30, so we'll get as many of these in as we can. So there's a question that's, how important are programming skills such as Python and R, and how would you weigh a degree in computer science compared, against the job applications of these skills? I'm not sure exactly what it means there, but certainly how important are programming skills? And again, I'll just throw in, I think generally speaking, it depends on the job, but then also it's like all programming skills are going to be helpful if you've actually learned them in a way that you can really apply them. I wouldn't bother to just take a class and then never have any way to apply it and continue to learn, but certainly depending on the job, they can come in very handy. Does anyone else have comments about that?
I want to throw something out, Leslie. In the work that we do, we're always trying to seek efficiencies. There's only so much time, so many resources, and if you can make a process more efficient through programming, it's going to be more successful. So being able to know something about Python or R, if you're dealing with statistical or other projects, and being able to leverage those tools to streamline processes for efficiencies, that can definitely be beneficial.
Yeah, I'll second that. This is Shawna. So I think in terms of career path development, right, so the positions that are going to be 3 or 2 or 4 levels up from where you originally start out at a company probably will require some level of programming. So if you have a, you have a technical mindset and you want to stay on a technical track, ultimately that will likely lead into some type of engineering role. And almost all engineering roles in our world that we're in GIS, will require some programming for sure.
This is Bill. I just echo the same thing. I mean, I see that all the time now. Python, and the person mentioned R. R is a great program. It's so versatile, and it really does open some doors and allows you to look at a variety of things. Faraday's, again, is a great example where they need those skills in both R and Python. So I would say they're good. You've got to find a way to either get some GIS skills to complement it, or find a team or a company that has that niche that has, GIS, and then learn it that way. But very valuable.
And this is Darren. The last thing I'll say in this arena is that, at my work at CCRPC, I'm doing, a lot of grunt work and, chunking through each data set for each town in Chittenden County, and Python automation is sort of the name of the game. If you can figure out a way to automate that so that you don't have to, spend half an hour doing the same steps, over and over, and just do it in one click and then work on something else, that's a highly valuable skill, both for you as, an employee and an applicant, as well as for the company and the organization that, now you're able to work on other projects. So I would say Python and programming in general are highly valuable skills, and as Bill said, it's a matter of figuring out how to market that and how to find your niche and make them see the value in what you have to offer.
Great, thank you. There's a question here about common advice says networking is key. What's the best way to go about networking to find jobs to apply to and to get interviews? And I'll just reiterate what we all talked about earlier, which is participating in regional listservs, email listservs, and then participating in any events, more local events that you can hear about. And then, of course, there's regional conferences like New York, like the EURISA has a national conference, and then New England EURISA also has a day-long conference once a year. So all of those are opportunities to connect with people. But I'd be happy to hear everyone else's suggestions as well.
I think if you can somehow afford to, or if you can find a free one, networking at conferences is really valuable. So you'll meet folks who are in GIS or a similar line of business, maybe a company that uses GIS, but certainly rubbing elbows at a conference is a good opportunity also for networking in your field.
There's also a question here. I'm not sure I want to ask this one only because how important do you feel GISP certification is? That is the question, and it's a good question. I didn't mean to imply it's not a good question. I'm just worried we'll end up talking about that the rest of the time. But what is people's quick answer to how important the GISP is at this point?
This is Bill. I don't have any experience with it, so maybe I'm naive, but I just don't. It hasn't come up much with my students or with employers, but I could just be. It could be a different thing. So to me, it hasn't really played much of a role, but could be wrong.
No, I would agree with that. I think it's important in that it shows the commitment, but I think it's not a deal breaker, certainly.
Currently, for the GIS Professional Series within state government, GISP is not required. But that may be something that may change in the future. Just as we have licensed land surveyors, it may be a requirement to have a GISP for some positions. But at this point, that's not the case.
It's good to know for someone looking in GIS careers and hoping to not be excluded based on that simple certification alone.
Yeah, and for anyone that's not familiar with GISP, it does require a certain amount of experience in order to get it, so it's not really something you can get right at the beginning of your career. It does take a few years to build up the job experience, basically, to be able to put it together. There are a couple more questions about people who are kind of doing that mid-career change, and I think maybe we addressed some of that in previous questions. somebody asked, how important is it to put your pay at your previous jobs on your application form if they ask for it? And I guess I will just briefly say that if something is asked for, if something is specified in an application process, I think you really do need to at least address it. It's never a good idea to ignore something that is that has been laid out in an application process. I think, as we said before, you can explain things about your previous pay if you want to, and I think that employers will look at that, will read that. I don't know if anyone else wants to comment on that.
I'll comment quickly and say that I recently filled out an application that asked for previous salary or expected salary, and it wasn't required in the application, and I didn't fill it out only because coming from the other side of things where I'm in a career that isn't GIS focused and is more lower salary than what I would expect as a GIS professional, I just didn't want to set the bar too low and the other side of things, but probably would have been a good idea to fill out at least something of like, here's what I currently make, but here's what I hope to make, or here's why.
Great. And someone responded to my comment, and yes, I would admit that you may very well get inappropriate or information asked for that you don't feel comfortable giving, and that's absolutely true, that you can choose not to apply to positions that include that kind of question. And then there's also a question, I don't know that we're going to have any specifics, but maybe we do. Are there good GIS companies that offer work from home options, and can we recommend any? That might be...
Pitney-Bowes.
Yeah, so you guys do?
Yep. We have, in fact, I'm working from home right now, so yes, Pitney-Bowes absolutely has a very large, what we call agile work environment, so folks who work remotely, globally.
And maybe another question related to that might be, is it appropriate when you're applying for a job to ask about that? If it's not something that's been explicitly stated by the company or in the position description, is it appropriate to ask? Or does that serve as a red flag to employers if someone asks that question?
I think there's a time to ask it, and that is when you're through the process quite a ways. I probably wouldn't ask it up front. Shawna, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's almost like an earned privilege, right? So you have to prove that you're responsible, reliable, and that you execute on your goals and tasks likely before you'll be granted the sort of permission to work from home. And that's not in every case. Some positions are remote by design from the get-go, but that is always communicated right out of the gate. So if it says location remote, then okay, it's appropriate to talk about in the very beginning. If it doesn't, then I would wait until much later in the process to bring it up. And if it's a deal breaker for you, then maybe you bring it up sooner. If it's, if the position is, I'll use our example, if the position says White River Junction, Vermont, and you live in Florida and you have no plans of moving, you'll want to have that conversation. Even just to ask, is the expectation that a candidate would relocate to Vermont if they get the role? That's a more appropriate way to sort of address that question, because then the employer will say, yes, it is. It's an on-site required position, or they'll say, no, we're willing to be flexible with the right candidate to work remotely.
Great, that's great advice. And then I think I'm going to end things with thank you for mentioning this. Someone just said, I may have missed it, but is there contact information for today's presenters? And you didn't miss it, and I forgot to include it in this little PowerPoint. So what I will say is I'm going to remind everybody that this webinar is being recorded, and it's going to be posted at our YouTube page, which you can get to from the front page of the VCGI website. And I will add into this little PowerPoint that I have been using everybody's contact information, so you will find it there, which means it'll be, actually it won't be in the webinar. I also post information about all the webinars in our event archive, and So there will be a posting here for this webinar, and it will include both the webinar and the PowerPoint, and you'll find it there. I think I'll also just maybe send it out to everyone who participated today, since I forgot to include that in the PowerPoint. So I think that is it for today. Thank you very much to all of our panelists. I really appreciate all the insight that you shared. And thank you very much to all the participants who sent in great questions. And let me just make sure there's nothing else. All right, thank you, great. Okay, so everyone, thank you, and sorry we went over by a few minutes, and I hope that you are all safe and not driving any more than you have to today if you're in the snowy Northeast. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you.